in this whole thesis of too many carbs, too much sugar, raising the insulin. There's a double-edged sword here. We just talked about the insulin piece and the damage it can cause. But elevated blood glucose can cause small vessel damage as well. Bring that piece in.
So glucose is like grains of sand. Okay. The higher your blood glucose goes, the more grains of sand you got. Okay. Now, if you only have a couple of grains of sand, and you've got liquid going, no big deal. Okay. But if you have a lot of grains of sand and you have liquid going, it might actually damage the inside of your vasculature. So high glucose causes dysfunction of the internal vasculature, especially small vessels. So it causes microvascular disease, causes retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy, problems in the eye, problems in the nerve, problems in the kidney. So high blood glucose due to, say, type 1 diabetes will take its toll, irrespective of insulin or not. But high blood insulin will cause macrovascular disease because of that growth that we just talked about, irrespective of the glucose. So they do two different things to the vasculature, and they're both bad, but they're different. So the high blood glucose causes small vessel disease. The high blood insulin causes large vessel disease. And usually end up with both, because that's what diabetes is high blood glucose and high blood insulin. So you end up with both. So there's type 2 diabetes for you. I've always found interesting as a pediatrician, we always had type 1 diabetes. That was always in our portfolio. But now we have type 2 diabetes too, which we never had. When I entered medical school, type 2 diabetes in children was unheard of, was reportable. Now it's 1/3 of all patients. Okay. And it happened on my watch. And so when I learned diabetes, I learned type 1. And what we learned was that it took years and years and years of high blood glucose to effectuate that microvascular disease problem. But what was interesting was when type 2 diabetes came around, we could see patients in clinic, pediatric patients, adolescents, who didn't have diabetes yet, but they had high blood insulin. They had insulin resistance. They were obese, but they were not diabetic. They had normal blood glucoses. They had normal glucose tolerance. So it wasn't from hyperglycemia, but they already had albumin in their urine. They had microalbuminuria. They already had the kidney manifestation of insulin acting on the kidney. And they were adolescents, not 40 years later. They were already kids. They were just kids. And they already had signs of insulin damage. So people think diabetes is because of high blood glucose. They think that all the damage is due to the high blood glucose. That is wrong. That is a mistake. That's because they didn't live through it like I did. In fact, in 2008, the group at Joslin, Sudha Bittinger was the first author, but this was in Ron Kahn's lab, developed my favorite mouse in the whole world. I love this friggin' mouse. Best mouse ever. This mouse basically sends everybody back to medical school because it is so paradoxical. It is so out of line with everything we learn in medical school. And it's true. And, it's because what we teach in medical school is wrong. And this is the mouse that proves that they're wrong. This mouse is called the Podirko mouse, Podirko. What is it? It is the insulin receptor has been lifted genetically out of the kidney of this mouse. The rest of the mouse is perfectly fine. Wild type mouse everywhere except the kidney. No insulin receptor in the kidney. So this animal has normal glucose tolerance because the beta cells work fine. This animal has normal liver because the liver works fine. This animal has normal brain because the brain works fine. But this animal has the worst diabetic nephropathy, worst diabetic kidney disease of any animal model on the planet. Normal blood glucose, worst diabetic nephropathy. If glucose is the cause of the kidney disease, how does this animal that has normal glucose have the worst kidney disease? That's why everyone has to go back to medical school to figure that out. Okay? And the answer is because it's not the glucose that caused the damage. It's the insulin. So these animals have normal insulin, but the insulin's not working at the kidney. And so they end up with diabetic nephropathy. They end up with diabetic kidney disease. That's telling us that it's the insulin that's the problem. And that's why these adolescents who don't have diabetes yet have microalbuminuria, which is the first sign of the transition to metabolic syndrome, to diabetic kidney disease, even with normal glucose. So insulin is the bad guy. I can't say it any simpler than that. Yes, glucose is bad too. I'm not saying it's not. Insulin's worse.
Hence why I opened up with that, and we've been focusing on it.
Well, insulin's a good thing to focus on.
What's the youngest you've seen somebody acquire type 2 diabetes? And the reason I ask that is because in our world, it's common knowledge that insulin resistance can go on in the background for a decade or even more.
Oh, yeah.
Before somebody becomes type 2 diabetic. So I would assume in kids, it would still take a period of time before they get to that point. So what's the youngest you see?
Age 5.
Wow.
I've seen a 5-year-old type 2 diabetic.
Crazy.
Yeah. Now, there are genetic forms of type 2 diabetes, which are, even earlier. Like, for instance, Rabson-Mendenhall and leprechaunism. Okay. They have genetic defects in the insulin receptor. So they have basically, insulin receptor deficiency to start with. They're like the Pediatric mouse many times over because it's in every organ. Okay. And you find those out like in the normal newborn nursery because they're sick as hell and their blood glucose ends up in the hundreds. And when you measure their insulin, it's also in the thousands. Okay. But the insulin, because there's no receptor to bind to, can't bring the glucose down. And those babies, the leprechauns especially, they die by age 1. Okay. Nothing can save them. Okay. We haven't figured out how to fix those babies yet. I took care of those babies, as a pediatric endocrinologist. They're rare, but they come, I would say probably 1 every 5 years. So I've taken care of like 3 of them. Okay. They're always disasters. But that's not what's happening in most people. Most people, it's insulin resistance occurring not because of a genetic defect, but because of some functional defect. And that functional defect is usually mitochondrial dysfunction.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
Insulin is the bad guy. I can't say it any simpler than that. Yes, glucose is bad too. I'm not saying it's not. Insulin's worse. Insulin is associated with all of the diseases.